Hello and welcome. My name is Christian Traverson, educator with the Lohmann Planetarium, and in this episode we'll be covering the dates of June 28th to July 4th. We're going to start things off with the summer triangle, which can be found in the east. Sagittarius and Scorpio can be found in the south this evening. We're going to do a little bit of planet hunting as well. There's quite a few out there in the evening sky. And later we're going to briefly take a look at some of the major events in space over the month of July. We start here in the east with the three very bright stars of Vega at the highest, Altair towards the south, and Deneb at the lowest part towards the north. These three stars make up an asterism, kind of a sub-constellation, known as the Summer Triangle, and they're also the three brightest stars of three separate constellations. At the top here with the star Vega, that is the constellation of Lyra the Harp. As you can see here, a great harp in the sky. Altair, a little bit lower in the sky, is part of the constellation of the Aquila, or the Great Eagle. And lastly, Deneb, here in the north, can be found within the constellation of Cygnus, the Swan, also another sub-asterism known as the Northern Cross. And it's here in Cygnus, where Deneb is, where I kind of want to focus for a moment. If we zoom in just a little bit, we can actually see a nebula here in this constellation near the tail. A little bit below Deneb, this is known as the North America Nebula, and it's known as the North American Nebula because, as you can see here, it kind of looks like the continent of North America. You can see the east coast all the way down to Florida, the Gulf of Mexico. In this area where California and Mexico would be, this is known as the Cygnus Wall. And so this is kind of a dense region within the nebula. And this is a really great opportunity if you're an astrophotographer or you have a pretty decent telescope to go out there towards the east and check out this awesome nebula. It'll be with us for quite some time throughout the summertime season, so you'll have plenty of opportunities to enjoy it. But it's really nice to view right now over in the east. We're now a little bit later in the evening, around midnight in the south, where the constellation of Sagittarius is on the rise. And we can see Sagittarius here, great centaur in our nighttime sky, one of the 12 constellations of the zodiac. You can make out this constellation with another asterism. This one is known as the Teapot. Now the Teapot is pretty easy to see. Some of the brightest stars of the constellation make this shape here, as you can tell. You can see the handle, the lid, and the spout of the great Teapot asterism that can be found here in the south by southeast. And this is how you'll know you're seeing the great centaur. And in fact, when you find the Teapot asterism, the upper part of the Teapot makes up the bow and arrow of Sagittarius here. He's actually shooting his bow, or his arrow rather, here in a dense region of our Milky Way galaxy. This is actually the relative center of our galaxy. Our galactic nucleus is what we call it here, part of our galactic horizon of the Milky Way galaxy. When you check out this region, you will also see another one of the 12 constellations of the zodiac. You can see what is probably one of the most prominent constellations in our nighttime sky. You'll see a tail or hook right here, J or hook shape, of the constellation of Scorpio, which will be at its highest point on the 30th of June. So very, very soon we'll see Scorpio here, very high, very prominent in our nighttime sky. Be on the lookout for some of the brighter stars of this constellation, the brightest of which being Antares. This is what we refer to as a pulsating variable star. It's also a binary system. It'll also appear very bright because it is a red supergiant star. It's actually nearing the end of its life. And depending on when it eventually goes supernova in a violent and blinding explosion, this will be one of the brightest objects in our nighttime sky, one of the brightest objects in the sky, period. Brighter than a full moon. You can even see this in the daytime sky, but don't worry if this were to go supernova. It is very, very far from us. It's around 550 light years away from us. A light year being the distance that light travels in a vacuum in space. And so that is incredibly far, 550 light years away from us, so don't worry, but we would be able to see it. And it would result in a nebula. So a lot of the gas and dust that Antares had, a lot of the hydrogen in its upper layers, would be expelled into space and form a nebula, a little bit like the North American Nebula that we cover, but this is a different type of a nebula known as an emission nebula. And so really interesting to see kind of the dynamic nature of our nighttime sky by observing Scorpio here. We now move later still in the morning of July the 1st, where both Jupiter and Saturn can be seen very bright in the sky. Jupiter being the brightest of which because it's a lot closer to us than Saturn. Jupiter is around 450 million miles away from us. And if you had a pretty decent telescope, you would be able to make out some of the magnificent features of Jupiter, such as the weather patterns, maybe even the Great Red Spot, and the 4 Galilean moons of Jupiter, Europa, Io, Ganymede, and Callisto. Much, much further away in the constellation of Capricorn, the sea goat, as you see here, one of the 12 constellations of the zodiac, we can see the planet Saturn. Now, Saturn will be a little more dim than Jupiter, and that's because it is incredibly far away, especially compared to Jupiter. While Jupiter is around 450 million miles away, Saturn almost doubles that at around 890 million miles away. And this actually makes Saturn the furthest planet that you can see in our nighttime sky without the use of a telescope. But if you did have a telescope, please check out Saturn because you'll see some of the magnificent rings of Saturn, and maybe some of the moons of Saturn, such as Titan, the largest moon. Now, both Jupiter and Saturn will be relatively close to what was a waning gibbous moon that we can see over here in the lower part of the eastern sky. This will actually be in its last quarter on the 1st of July, and later on in the month, on the 23rd of July, we'll have a full moon known as the Thunder Moon, and this is named as such due to its arrival alongside the frequent thunderstorms in the early summer. And if you want to check out where some of these planets are throughout, and the moon as well, throughout the month and the rest of the year, I suggest a website known as timeanddate.com. They'll show you the rise and set of each of the planets, the moon as well, how long they'll be in the nighttime sky for, and how long the visibility will be prime for each of these planets, when they'll set, and in what direction you can find each of the planets in the nighttime sky. So it's a valuable resource. We use it at the museum to see what the movements of the planets are, to see when they're prime for viewing, and it's a really great resource. Go check out timeanddate.com. And so this represents, for the most part, what we can see in our evening sky at the start of summer throughout the month of July. Now I want to briefly take a look at some of the major events in space, mainly space flight, over the next month. And we begin with SpaceX. The Space Exploration and Technologies Group, known as SpaceX, is shooting for July to launch the first orbital spaceflight of its super heavy rocket known as Starship from its Boca Chica launch facility in South Texas. If successful, this will be a huge milestone for the company and for spaceflight, as a version of this Starship, known as the Moonship, will take astronauts to the lunar surface as part of NASA's Artemis program. So really exciting that they're shooting for July as the first true orbital test of their Starship. Now, a little closer to home, here at Cape Canaveral, Boeing plans to launch its Starliner on the second of its orbital flight test. This is planned to take place on July the 30th. This will be another step forward for NASA's efforts on using commercial spacecraft to ferry astronauts and cargo to the International Space Station. So be on the lookout for that launch. We're hoping to see that launch. It's really exciting, and that's going to take place once again on the 30th of July. Now, I do have a little more somber news with relation to the Hubble Space Telescope. Now, early last month, NASA found an issue that resulted in the telescope's payload computer that caused it to stop working. Now, while components such as the primary mirror still function, many of the other onboard cameras and equipment rely on this computer to run, which means that scientists can no longer communicate with the orbital observatory. NASA is continuing to diagnose the issue with the computer, so we are hoping here at the museum that they can resolve that issue, because the Hubble Space Telescope has been providing us with some incredible images, and we don't want to see anything happen to it. In fact, we do have an exhibit. We have two exhibits, Eye in the Sky, celebrating some of the great images taken by the Hubble Space Telescope, and it coincides with an actual planetarium show known as Hubble Universe, where we take a look at the 30 years that Hubble has been providing us those great images. And we hope that there's many more years to come with the Hubble Space Telescope, so we're holding our breath and hoping that NASA can resolve the issue and we can continue to get some incredible images and scientific data from the Space Telescope. And that's it for another edition of our Sky Tonight program. We thank you for tuning in and really appreciate your support, and please stop by the Loman Planetarium here at the Museum of Arts and Science. If you want any info on our shows or events, also check out our website at moaz.org. Thank you, take care, and happy stargazing.